Hi, everybody. I'm sorry that I'm not there with you tonight, but I'm definitely glad to be here with you virtually now, and just wanted to thank you for having me. Ben, can you cue that first? Thank you. Ben, can you cue that first slide for me? Okay. So for a minute, I just want you to imagine that you've had a baby girl. Imagine the hopes and the dreams that come along with that. Imagine what it's like to hold her in your arms for the first time, falling more in love than you ever thought possible. Now imagine that that baby girl will not stop crying after she eats. That in fact, you can't even keep up with the nutritional demands of that little baby that you love so much, no matter how hard you try. Imagine that she's not growing, that she's labeled failure to thrive at her checkup. And then imagine your baby's pediatrician asking you if she tastes salty when you kiss her. When you confirm puzzled, she tells you that it sounds like some tests are necessary. Imagine being a young mother just 22 years old and hearing for the first time the results of those tests. Imagine being told that your scared and uncomfortable 2-month-old has cystic fibrosis, a disease that you've never even heard of. Next, you're told that this baby, your first, your little love, may in fact not live past her 4th birthday or even live into her teens. This was reality for my mother in 1979. News like this is never easy at any point in a parent's life with his or her child. But because of advances in technology, some of the very technology that you all work with, potential parents can find out their odds of having a child with cystic fibrosis and other genetic diseases even before conception. Today, newborns in all 50 states are actually screened for cystic fibrosis routinely. This and other advancements in dealing with cystic fibrosis were made possible by the discovery of the CFTR gene on chromosome 7 in 1989. There was no genetic screening for CF of any kind when I was born. I was actually a lucky one at the time because my pediatrician had some experience with CF and she knew some of the signs and symptoms and knew to get me into a sweat test at that early age. This early diagnosis meant that I would actually start taking man-made enzymes to make up for my own pancreatic insufficiency. Taking enzymes meant that I could then digest my food and get nutrients for the first time. This meant that I would start gaining weight after what must have been 2 very difficult months for my body. I actually believe that this pediatrician's knowledge and early treatment was a huge part of what would contribute to my health and quality of life as a toddler and young child. There were actually children born before me in my own family line who were just called sickly children and died very young without any other explanation. I have friends who weren't diagnosed until they were 1 or 3 or 8 or 25 even. That was obviously someone who had a bit of a milder form. But because of the discovery of the CFTR gene and subsequent advances, we now know there's over 1,800 mutations of the cystic fibrosis gene. Some are common and others are rare, and they're found in only a few people. We even know that certain types of CF mutations are associated with different symptoms of the disease. For example, some mutations are most likely to affect the gastrointestinal tract than the lungs. However, knowing an individual's CF mutations cannot tell you how severe that person's CF symptoms will be. Someone with the same genetic mutation could maintain lung function, for example, longer than another, or respond to a medication differently than another. There's a lot that we still have to discover. What we do know so far is that cystic fibrosis, or CF, is a recessive genetic disease. It affects every mucous membrane in the body. Many people, if they even hear about CF at all, often just think of the lungs as being affected with CF. But it also affects the digestive tract, the liver, the reproductive organs, the whole respiratory tract, very much including the sinuses and the pancreas. In fact, it was actually my pancreatic insufficiency that led to the first signs and symptoms of me even having CF. It's actually thought that my pancreas digested itself and was clogged before I was even born. So as I said, there's over 1,800 possible mutations of this gene that can lead to a person having what we now call cystic fibrosis. But to sum up the end result, excuse me, basically the electrolytes don't pass across the cell membrane for the mucous membranes of the body. This creates a thick, sticky mucus and blocks areas and prevents proper function. But it also creates a perfect breeding ground for bacteria that leads to chronic underlying infections and an accumulation of opportunistic bacteria. And if you could just show the next slide, please. So, for me, once I began my digestive enzymes and could get some of my nutritional needs met, I grew into a nourished, curious, quirky toddler. Our next photo, please. My parents and family did a good job of normalizing things for me, and probably they also needed to do this for themselves. I wasn't given any special treatment that I was aware of. I didn't even know about my life expectancy until I actually remember going to school at the library to look up cystic fibrosis one day in elementary school. At which point, I did remember seeing the life expectancy, but I think I was told that it was just outdated information, and I don't really remember having a major concern. I remember thinking that it was kind of scary, kind of weird for me, but I just didn't really go there. I knew basically there was something different about me, but I wasn't overly worried about it. I knew I took enzymes with every meal and snack. This was something that I had to do. I knew I needed to do that because I had CF, and if I didn't, I would be in a lot of belly pain. But to be honest, I was actually in a lot of belly pain at that point anyway. There were continual issues with constipation and the stool. I used to have what I called enzyme tummy aches pretty regularly. Basically, this is what you would feel if food goes through your body without being properly digested. It's terrible. To this day, I have never had a stomachache that is more painful than an enzyme stomachache. So I don't really remember a point in my life when I realized that I was specifically different than other kids, but I just sort of knew that things were a little different for me. I didn't really know exactly why. I was prescribed chest PT for when I was little, something that we called cupping. And in the video, you probably saw a point where Rick, my husband, was actually kind of hitting me on the back on the couch. That's actually a treatment. It's okay. But there's cupping is when you make a cup, literally, with your hand, and you have to pat on the body. And this is done in 20 different positions for 2 minutes at a time. And the whole goal is to free mucus, mobilize mucus in areas where it might be stuck. There's also other ways to do it. There's a vest, and there's some other manual therapies that you can do as well now. But back when I was first diagnosed, cupping was it. So Ben, if you could just show the next slide, please. I used to get strep a lot and sore throats. I was on antibiotics a fair amount so that viruses or colds didn't turn into something worse. I was sick a bit more than other kids, maybe. I had CF clinic about every 6 months in early childhood. I do remember that I was doing so well at one point that my doctors wanted to retest me because they thought maybe I didn't even have CF. But after another positive sweat test, it seemed that I did. By age 10, things started to change. I experienced my first in-house hospitalization since I was diagnosed at 2 months. This would be my first of what we call in CF speak tune-up. So Ben, if you could show the next slide. So for a tune-up, we go in for what is usually a 2-week period of time, and it's a 2-week course of IV antibiotics, usually 2 at a time. There's increased nebulized treatments and there's increased physiotherapy, usually 4 times a day. There's not much rest and there's not much sleep, actually. I always laugh because when I go into the hospital, so many people say to me, "Oh, you're in there for so long, you must get so bored." And to be honest, bored is the absolute last thing I am when I'm in the hospital. That first day for me was really hard. There were so many IVs and tests and firsts. I remember the toll that it seemed to take on my parents. They would take turns staying overnight with me so that I wasn't alone because we never knew when an IV would blow. The meds were so toxic, they were so tough on my veins that sometimes they could blow every day. This was also a realization point for me. I had my first IV, and I remember after the pain of actually getting it in, the thing that I most remember was this moment where I had the IV antibiotic going in. I remember looking down at my hand and looking up at the IV bag and looking down at my hand and looking up at the IV bag and looking down at my hand again and the tubing that was coming out and just thinking, I must be in a movie. I must be in a movie. This only happens in the movies. I must be in a movie. But then it really was a realization point. The realization for me at that point was this is real. I have CF. It's a very real thing, and it can be dangerous. Fortunately, I improved. My pulmonary function test improved at that point, and I was able to leave the hospital after 2 weeks. I think that I thought since I avoided going in for so long that I wouldn't have to go in again for a very long time. I was thinking, another 10 years. Instead, my next hospitalization was actually the following year. Over the next few years, I would come to a place where I would be in yearly, and by the time I was in high school, I was in every 6 months. Ben, if you could just show the other photo, please. So eventually I started getting PICC lines. A PICC line is a peripherally inserted central catheter. This step was harder for me to graduate to, but it did make tune-ups easier because these types of lines last longer. Basically, a PICC line is inserted at the part of the arm, I don't know if you can see here, but by the anticube down by the elbow. And the tubing goes within the vessel all the way up the arm, and it goes into the superior vena cava of the heart. And here, the medicine is pumped in. The idea is that it's going into a bigger vessel so that then it won't be as irritating on the smaller vessels, but then also that your heart can pump the medicine through the body. So with PICC lines, there's more risks and there's more complications, many of which I've actually had. They're harder to insert, but I would still prefer them over daily IVs that would continually blow. I don't know if it was growing up with cystic fibrosis or just my nature or a combination of both, but I always remember knowing life's preciousness. Because of this, I cherished my days and experiences, and I always did my best to let those that I loved really know it. I seized every opportunity for adventure, and I grew up appreciating, seeing, and wanting to intimately experience the beauty of life. I eventually met other kids who had CF. There were CF family days. There were CF weeks at a local 4-H camp. So Ben, if you could just cue up that next photo. This is actually a photo from CF camp. So medical professionals would actually come to the camp and do our medical treatments for us throughout the day so that we could have a quote-unquote normal camp experience. I remember these times with these kids as some of the best in my childhood. Some were older, some were younger, and some were actually my own age, had CF. This was amazing for me. Finally, I belonged because I had CF. I could talk or not talk because they already knew about all the yuck of CF. So let's face it, CF is not a glamorous disease. It's a disease that revolves around mucus, gross to even say, right? GI issues, which is code for bowel problems and gas. And then there's blood, if you're lucky. So it's not something that you're going to share openly at a sleepover or, talk about while you're playing Duck, Duck, Goose. So finally, while I was with these kids, it was normal to pull out my pills before a meal. My cough was normal. It was an incredible feeling. So at these camps, I met a young man named Jeff Moore. So Ben, if you could cue this photo, please. So I have to say that I'm old, thank goodness. And this photo is from before the digital age. So Jeff might kill me for showing this, and this was very early in the morning before treatment, but this is one of the best that I have of him. So Jeff was a cross between my best friend and a boyfriend, or as close to a boyfriend as you can have at 12 years old. We adored each other. We not only had time at camp together, but we were actually hospitalized at the same time. In between treatments, we played through the hospital halls. We would wait for our dads to fall asleep, and then we would run back out in the hall and play together or visit in each other's rooms. We were known to make water guns out of syringes. We made an amazing time out of a difficult experience. I love Jeff to pieces. He was a really special kid. Everybody loved Jeff. And when I was 12 and Jeff was 13, he passed away. I would never be the same. Sorry. I remember the nurse coming to my home and telling my parents and I remember being up in my room alone after she had left. I remember his calling hours. I remember so much grief. But again, this was another realization point for me. It was a whole new level of this is real. Jeff was my friend. He had what I had, and he died, and he was my age. The realization about my own disease and mortality was there. I also actually had guilt for still living myself. I remember there was a medication that was approved shortly after he died, and there was a time period where I didn't even want to take it. I had a lot of grief and really wanted things to be different, but I mostly missed that connection that was like no other. And very honestly, I still miss him today. Since that time, I've lost many other friends to cystic fibrosis. So Ben, if you could cue the next photo. These are actually photos of some of my friends who have passed recently. They're all amazing in their own way. It's never easy losing someone that you're close to. And I would say that losing my friends to cystic fibrosis and seeing them suffer the way that an individual suffers at end-stage CF is one of those heartbreaking parts of my life with CF. So, what is life now? What is life like now for me with CF? Basically, life with cystic fibrosis is challenging. I recently read an article that an average person with CF coughs 700 times per day. So I haven't counted personally, but I'll tell you that I believe it. I miss a lot of time that I don't want to. I miss time from work. I miss time from life, being sick. I spend a lot of time trying to catch up from the time that I need to take off from other things while recouping. I also, in all fairness, and Jenny can probably vouch for this, I do too much. But when I do push too hard, my body lets me know it, and it's not subtle anymore. CF demands a lot of care. I spend a lot of time not only devoted to treatments, but also researching. All my efforts are an attempt to stay as healthy as I can, as long as I can. What I call well care, which is what it means to actually take care of myself when I'm doing well, just maintenance, is a full-time job. Ben, if you could cue the other photo. So well care for me includes daily 2 to 3 hours of some kind of chest PT, 2 to 3 nebulized treatments per day, sometimes about 20 minutes at a time, About 50 pills a day. A good portion of these pills are actually my digestive enzymes. I work hard to get 3,000 calories that my body can actually use and digest in a day. Because with CF, not only do we have malabsorption issues, but a body that's also continually dealing with underlying infection burns a lot of calories. And if we start to get even a little bit sicker, I need even more calories than that in a day. I also do a number of other whole body treatments that are scattered throughout the day as I can. Excuse me. There's countless doctor's appointments, there's labs and follow-ups, there's phone calls to pharmacies and insurance companies, and there's arguments with both. I recently made a visit to my doctor's office, and he reviewed my treatment list, just my treatment list. And he said to me, "I got tired just reading your list." My days are very full, and they're purposeful. There are no days off from this regimen. I've had at least 5 sinus surgeries, over 50 PICC lines, countless IVs, hospital stays, ER visits due to CF exacerbations. I'm also currently in a more intense treatment. I'm on 3 oral antibiotics right now at very high doses for at least a year or longer. Almost all of these medications have side effects, some of which initially make me feel worse, or even for the duration feel worse than why I actually need the medication in the first place. A lot of living with CF is a balancing act. There's the balancing act of the kind of life I have to live, the kind of life that I need to live, or the kind of life, that I want to live with the kind of life I need to live. There's the pursuit of the length of life with quality of life. There's what it takes to stay well, and there's making time for joyful activities. There's the balancing act that my team and I have in terms of when to treat with antibiotics or when to hold out just a little bit longer if we can so as not to develop resistant bacteria. There's balancing when to rest and when to push ahead with activity so that I don't lose ground in my ability to even do activity. There's also balancing the vigilance with being able to let go. With cystic fibrosis, most of the treatments, even some of the nutritional treatments, really focus on preventing the downward spiral. There's no cure for cystic fibrosis right now. You see, these countless number of treatments are not really to get better or to be healed, but instead they're just trying to prevent things from getting worse for as long as you can. So there's a vigilance that can easily shift to fear around preserving lung function and trying to keep that bacteria under control. So I really find that it's mentally important to balance that fear, that vigilance, with also being able to lean into a deeper trust. There's some days that takes a lot more willpower to keep going and keep my head up. As that doctor noticed by just looking at my treatment schedule, it can all be really tiring. Then there's what we call a CF exacerbation, which is even more intense than what I've already shared. It can happen quickly, especially the older I get and the more advanced the disease becomes. It can come from catching a simple cold or virus that others might be able to get rid of. A cold could turn into a downward spiral that can end up in a hospitalization. It's a situation that can get scary quickly. The flu or a more serious respiratory virus could be even worse. We can lose weight and lung function quickly. There is a lot of coughing. And it's like you can never get to the end of that fluid that's making you do so. There are relentless all-nighters when the coughing can be so much that you actually feel like you could go mad. There are times when I am so tired that I literally have somehow fallen asleep while still coughing, sitting up. When you have CF, coughing is a full body experience. I have pulled stomach muscles, neck muscles, intercostals, torqued ribs, moved vertebrae out during times of intense coughing. I've woke in the middle of the night with full-on asthma attacks and coughed until I vomited repeatedly. Sometimes waking up is the worst. There's also a component called air trapping. Many people with CF have at least some amount of air trapping, and this means that air actually gets stuck in our lungs. So we can't actually have a full, efficient exhale. With this air literally being trapped in our lungs, we can't get a full exchange of air, and it feels like you're gasping for breath. But what we really need to be able to do is just have a full exhale. Have your lungs be able to let go. Excuse me. There's also something called hemoptysis. Hemoptysis is when we're coughing up blood. This can come on even without an official CF exacerbation. The first time that I saw blood in my sputum, I was 18, and it was a little scary for me because I knew that Jeff had died by drowning in his own blood. The first time I think I actually had an episode of what I would classify today as an actual hemoptysis, where I'm just coughing up straight blood, was when I was maybe 20. This eventually increased more and more frequently until I had to have what was my first BAE. A BAE is a bronchial arterial embolization. Basically, they go in through the groin, they go up through vessels, up into the chest, and they go into the vessels that are the blood supply for the lung, and they insert plastic pellets to try and stop that blood supply and the possibility of bleeding there. It's a risky procedure, and you can bet the first time it happened, I was really scared. Ben, if you could just show the next photo, please. So I had my first BAE, and that helped some. But then, unfortunately, the bleeding was back again. Oh, I just wanted to tell you guys, that photo was after my first BAE, and that's my great husband there by my side. So that BAE helped some, but the bleeding was back again. And this was really scary for a while because I never knew when it might happen. I literally felt like a ticking time bomb. I remember one of the bigger episodes. I was out in public. I had just climbed the stairs, and it happened. I could feel the blood filling in my mouth, and I just felt like I just had to get myself to the bathroom. It felt like there was pure water in my chest. I remember being in that bathroom stall and seeing the amount of blood and literally wondering if I was going to die there. I remember trying to call my mom and text Rick, call the doctor. I know that was scary for both my mom and Rick, and I'm sure for others who witnessed it. It happened even more after that. So eventually I needed a second BAE, and this time the doctor was much more aggressive. I have bled since then as well, but not to the amount I did prior to that last BAE. Honestly, a bleed out is something that I still fear. Finally, there is end-stage CF, and I touched on this before. Ben, if you could cue up the next photo. This is actually a picture of my friend Pete's hand and mine not long before he passed away. End-stage CF is not kind. I've witnessed what it's done to my friends, and I've had small tastes of it myself last April. The descent and what comes with it can be absolutely brutal on a body. The deterioration and filling of the lungs is uncomfortable. There is chest pain. It can feel like there is an ocean in your chest, and it's hard to push against the heaviness. It feels like drowning on the inside. There's points where we might literally not know if that next breath is going to come. There's coughing fits that leave you gasping, your whole body rocking, chest rattling, and you wonder how your body can ever survive that. At this point, coughing until one vomits is usually a daily occurrence. Simple daily household chores or hygiene tasks become difficult and sometimes impossible without help. Many times the person has just enough breath or energy to get up, to get through those first morning coughs, to get dressed and get through treatments before needing a nap or to rest. For some, this descent is quick. For many, it's a slow progression with some dramatic drop-offs, and they just never rebound from them. Sometimes a lung transplant can be an option to prolong life at this point. It would have to be a double lung transplant, and it's risky. It comes with its own set of complications, and I could give a whole separate presentation on that. So Ben, if you could click to the next photo, please. So how do I do it? How do I face living with chronic illness that gets harder with time and at this point most likely does not have a very happy or comfortable ending? It's challenging. Emotionally, physically, mentally, every time I lose lung function, it's hard. What's even harder is coming to terms with my new baselines, new normals, new steps in the progression, new bests that it will get. Feeling that change throughout my lifetime has been sobering. I'm someone who loves adventure. I love to travel and I love exploration. I love fun. I love free time with my friends. I love to go for it and I love to seize every opportunity to experience some new aspect of life. However, my body's current demands and limitations mean that I need to consider all of this more carefully. I need to say no now much more than I want to, with friends, family, and opportunities in order to say yes to my life. This has been something that's been really difficult for me. I'm making hard choices now every day. But over the years, I've come to realize and remember that honestly, at some level, this decline in some way, shape, or form is true for everybody. We're impermanent, and what we have now will change. Ben, if you could flip to the next photo. So in meeting all of this, I've found a deep strength and resiliency. I have made a commitment to keep showing up with as much honesty and compassion as I know how. I savor those moments that I do have. So these next few slides are going to come a little quick, Ben. So hang on. You can flip to the next one. I savor the time that I have with my family and friends. And then the next photo, my amazing partner and friend. And the next photo, and of course, our undeniably cute fur babies. I actually see this awareness of my impermanence, having it in my face so strongly at certain times, is one of CF's gifts, honestly. I know the privilege of being able to walk, talk, and breathe with my own lungs for 36 years. I do not take my time in this world for granted. I remember to look around and take in the beauty in front of me, and I pause to notice the preciousness. I drink in as much of life as I can. Next photo, Ben. And as you can see, sometimes that means I need to do it with a nebulizer. I make loving and sharing what I've learned on this journey a priority. I do still feel sadness. I have a longing for some ease or a day off from all of this. I feel frustration sometimes, and as I mentioned, I feel fear sometimes. Last photo, Ben. But I just try my best to bring all of that to what I call love, and know that I'm actually a part of something bigger than my limitations that I might feel. So here's what's true for those diagnosed with cystic fibrosis today. Although it's still not an easy road by any means, the outlook is overall better for those born with CF today than it was in 1979. The average life expectancy has increased to now close to 36 years. Now that said, that's simply an average statistic, and that number is probably unfairly influenced by the number of diagnoses that are now occurring for people who have milder disease. I personally have friends who passed away very recently that were in their mid-20s. I know others who've passed younger, and I also have a friend who's almost 50. She's my hero. Treatments are advancing. There's new modulator drugs and advances in genetics. This last year in particular has been a super exciting year with FDA approvals of 2 CFTR modulator therapies that are that are designed to actually correct the function of the defective protein itself. These drugs could really make a difference for those who have certain mutations of CF. I'm actually one of those people. However, that drug didn't work in the way that it was designed for me. There is still no cure for CF. For those of us living with the disease, we are hoping that a cure comes and that it comes soon, because time is incredibly important. Lung damage is not reversible. Early diagnosis through genetic testing has been an important component for improving life expectancy. Research shows that children who receive CF care early in life have better nutrition and healthier than those who are diagnosed later. Early diagnosis can actually improve growth, can keep our lungs healthy, it can reduce hospital stays, and it can add years to our life. I believe that it was paramount for me, my ability to start growing, for my nutrition and my overall health, being diagnosed early. But as I said before, I was really fortunate to have a doctor who knew about cystic fibrosis and could get that early sweat test and thus diagnosis. The work that's being done at Counsyl is also an important part of early education, preparation, and choice making. Parents can get a head start at researching, understanding their resources, and preparing for the possibilities. In my opinion, education is important. Not just education about someone's genetic makeup, but education about what to do with that information and where to go next given their value system and needs. There's tough choices to be made when we receive difficult information. I'm only one person, but I can say without a doubt that my life is beautiful. It's worth living. Cystic fibrosis is hard. It's taught me about needing to meet challenge after challenge. It's taught me about loss and heartbreak. And it's been physically painful and literally taken my breath away. It has taken time from me. But it's also taught me to not take a single breath for granted. To appreciate every treatment and every experience. It's taught me the value of one more year, one more day, and at points, one more hour. It has taught my loved ones and I about kindness, compassion, resilience, hope, and a strength that we may not otherwise know. My life is valuable, and I would say worth every effort it has taken to meet it. At the same time, I honor and respect that choice that's now possible with this technology. The choice of those who understandably want to prevent this particular struggle for their child and their families. I also recognize the early identification and elimination of the possibility of more children being born with CF reduces the possibility of cystic fibrosis effect in our world and on our future. Unfortunately, with the way our healthcare system is set up, a reduced number of people having CF will also affect funding for research at the same time. However, I of course do not wish the disease on any little baby coming into the world. And if I could prevent that, I would. I don't think any of us can pretend to know the right choices for anyone else, but education can help us to understand more about what those choices are. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of my story and my life with you and wanting to know more about what life is like with cystic fibrosis.